Okay, so I remember when I was first getting into electric guitar and learning about effects, and especially when I started to learn about recording and playing, the idea of compression being one of the most confusing and hard to understand things, at least for me. It honestly took me years to get a firm grasp of what a compressor does, what a threshold or ratio and attack and sustain and all these different controls meant. And as guitar players and bass players, we are in somewhat of a unique position in that we have compressor pedals that go on our pedal board. And this is amazing because once you understand what these do and how to use them, you can create some incredibly cool tones and sounds with this little tool. So in today's video, we're going to talk about compression. I'm going to tell you everything that you need to know about compressors, both pedals and outboard compressors and plugins. We're going to teach you the fundamentals of compression, and I'm going to show you a couple of different examples of how I like to use not just compressor pedals on my electric rig, but compressors when I'm recording acoustic guitars. Literally something that I use every single time I record guitar for a video or a session or even live. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the video, but before we do, a quick plug for the Tone course. If you're interested in learning more about concepts like compression and stacking overdrives and how to use fuzz and placing mics on speakers, I made a whole video course dedicated to the ins and outs of helping you find your sound on the guitar and understanding great guitar tone. And it's currently 20% off via the link in the description box down below. So if you're interested, check that out, as well as my other video courses on my website, rhettshull.com. Without further ado, let's jump in and talk about compression. So what exactly is compression? Well, put simply, a compressor's job is to take an audio signal, like my voice, for example, and even out the dynamic range. It takes the low parts, the quiet parts of the signal, and boosts them up in amplitude. And it takes the peaks or the high parts of the signal and it attenuates or cuts them down, essentially evening out the audio signal. Now, compression is an incredibly useful tool that's used in pretty much all aspects of the audio world, and it's not just in music. Compressors were first invented in the 1930s for the radio broadcast in the early telecommunication world, because you needed a way to control the dynamic range of a radio broadcast. If you were broadcasting a performance in a theater, for example, you needed a way to boost the low parts, maybe an actor or a singer speaking or a radio announcer speaking, and attenuate the high parts, like the crowd clapping, for example. You needed a way to control those dynamics so that people listening to their radios at home didn't get blasted out when the audience erupted in applause and could still hear the radio announcer when he was talking by himself. And right now I'm actually using a compressor. I'm actually using multiple compressors to compress my voice so that you watching this at home can hear me very clearly, whether you're watching on your TV or a tablet or a smartphone. The idea is to compress the dynamic range of my vocal so that no matter what device you're listening to and watching this video on, you can hear everything I'm saying, no matter how quietly I speak or how loudly I say it. You want it to be nice and even across the board. Now, all compressors, whether it's a compressor pedal like this or a rack mount compressor in my desk over there or a plug-in in your DAW, all work off of the same set of parameters. No matter how many controls they have or what they look like, there's a few fundamentals of compression that work across the board. The first one to understand is threshold. And simply, threshold is where the compressor starts working. So if you set the threshold control for your compressor really high, that means that the compressor is not going to start working until the loudest parts of your audio signal, i.e. the peak. It's only going to grab the peaks. Then as you bring the threshold down, the audio is going to cross that threshold sooner, meaning the compressor is going to start working sooner. And if you bring it down far enough, the audio is always crossing the threshold, which means the compressor is always compressing the audio. So where you set the threshold determines how much the compressor is actually working. Next up is ratio. Oftentimes you'll see this on compressors as a set of numbers like 2-to-1, 4-to-1, 10-to-1, 20-to-1. And simply, this is how much compression is being applied. Now, there is sort of a formula behind these numbers. For instance, if you have a 4-to-1 compression ratio, the audio signal needs to cross the threshold by 4 dB to be increased in volume by 1 dB. So the best way you can think about it, the lower the first number, the less compression is being applied. So for example, 1-to-1 compression is no compression at all. 2-to-1 is very light. 4-to-1 is very medium compression. Then you start getting into 6-to-1, 10-to-1, which is heavier compression. And then you start to get to 20-to-1 or infinite on some compressors, and that's what we would call limiting. But in this example, I think it's better to hear the differences. So let me set up a mic, grab an acoustic guitar, and I'll show you the differences in ratio. Okay, so I've got my acoustic guitar going through this AEA ribbon microphone, going through a preamp, and then through this top distressor here on my desk. Now, the distressor is a great all-around studio compressor. You can use it for all kinds of things, but I'm using it here because it has a really great, easy to see meter on the front, these LEDs. The more they light up, the more compression is going on, which should help you understand what's happening in this video. Now on the distressor, if you look at the bottom, there's a row of LEDs, and these are the ratio settings for the distressor. It starts at 1-to-1, and it goes all the way up from 20-to-1 to nuke. And nuke is a setting on the distressor that's like full on limiting. Right now we're on 4-to-1 compression, which is a nice middle of the road setting. That means that in order for the overall volume to increase by 1 dB, the signal from the mic has to go over the threshold by 4 dB. But I'm going to start off at 2-to-1, which is very, very light compression, and we're going to step up through the compression settings, through the ratio settings, and hopefully you can hear how it changes. Now let's go up to 4-to-1. Now let's go even higher to 10-to-1. And just for kicks, let's put it on the nuke setting, which is its highest setting, basically an infinite ratio. Now the next parameter to understand is attack, and this JHS compressor here has a control for attack. And this is controlling how fast the compressor grabs and clamps down on the audio signal. So a really fast attack time on your compressor means it's going to start compressing as soon as it sees any audio signal come through. As you back off the attack time, it's going to start letting more and more of the audio through before it starts compressing. Now, much like the ratio, I think it's better to hear this. So let me jump back to the acoustic guitar and show you. So we're going to start with the distressor on its fastest attack setting, which is all the way here on 0. Now, if you watch the LED meters as I'm playing, you're going to see them light up super quick. And that's because as soon as the transient or the initial hit or the attack of the strings of the guitar come through the microphone and hit the compressor, it's clamping down on them. So check this out. Now I'm going to back the attack off to about halfway and hear the difference. And then we're going to go to its slowest setting. Now you may have noticed there on the meters that the attack setting was so slow that we actually weren't getting much compression at all. So to compensate for that, I'm going to push the input gain so the signal's hitting the compressor a little harder and bring down the output gain so that our level is the same. And this is what that sounds like. Now next we have release, or sustain as it's sometimes called, like on this pedal. Now, much like attack, release controls how fast the compressor lets go of the signal, or how much sustain you can get. If you have a really fast release time, you essentially are just grabbing the highest parts of the signal. The compressor is like clamping down and letting go really quickly. As you start to increase that release time, or the sustain, the compressor is going to clamp down and not let go of the signal until it starts to drop in amplitude below the threshold. This is how we start to get more sustain out of our guitar sound, for example. So like before, I'm going to set the release at its fastest setting, but before I actually play something, watch the meters. I'm going to strum just muted strings and watch how fast this thing lets go. You almost can't even see it, but this is what it sounds like. Now let's put it up about halfway. And now the slowest release setting. Now, like before, with its slowest release setting, you hear how quiet it is because it's not releasing. Essentially, it's compressing and then not letting go of the signal. So we were essentially compressing or attenuating the signal by 10 to 12 dB there. Another common parameter that you'll see on some hardware and software compressors and some pedals is knee. The knee is controlling how the compressor is applying the compression. So a hard knee is applying the compression straight away as the signal passes the threshold, versus a soft knee, which is gently applying the compressor the further the signal goes past the threshold. Next, we have makeup gain, or in this pedal's case, the volume. And because we're compressing, we are attenuating the signal, and oftentimes you're going to see a volume drop when you turn your compressor on. So the makeup gain ideally is allowing you to get the gain back to where it was before you applied the compression. So now let's talk a little bit about compressor pedals and a few different ways to use them on your pedal board. Now there's lots of different types of compressor pedals out there. Some of them are emulating famous pedals of years gone by. Some of them are aiming to emulate studio compressors, and they all have sort of different controls and different takes, but the fundamentals all remain the same. We're going to be using the JHS 3 series compressor here. JHS sent this to me last year to check out, and I think it's actually a pretty good middle-of-the-road simple compressor that's going to demonstrate the different concepts that I want to hear. And we've got that going into the Dane Overdrive by Thorpy Effects. Again, they sent that out to me last year. Danish Pete actually sent that out to me last year, so shout out to Danish Pete. And we're going from this little pedal board setup here into my orange AD30, which is set up for kind of like an edge of breakup kind of tone. This is typically how I like to run my amps. Just a straight ahead kind of middle of the road tone. So in a setup like this, where you've got your compressor in front of an overdrive, we can do a couple of different things. Focusing on the compressor to start with, we can use it to essentially even out our playing. This is a nice utility kind of thing. If you're playing like a single note line or some kind of part and you want each note to be nice and even, this is how I would set it up. So first things first, I've got it set up for what's called unity gain, which means that when I turn the effect on, my overall volume or my gain going into the front of the amp is not changing. And that's important because oftentimes whenever we hear something that's louder, we immediately think it's better just because it's louder. And it's important when you're auditioning effects like compressors to make sure that your gain is set at unity, whether you're using a pedal or using a plugin or a piece of hardware. That way you're actually hearing what the effect is doing and not just hearing a gain boost and immediately thinking it sounds better. So I've got the 3 series set at unity, and it's just giving me a little bit of light compression on the front end to kind of even out my note. Now, I don't know if you could tell there, but immediately I could feel and hear that compressor grab that chord. Now, it's a really subtle effect. It's almost more of a feel thing than anything else. Now, with its current setting, with the attack pretty high and the sustain or the release relatively low, essentially what the compressor is doing here is just grabbing the peaks of my playing, and this is really useful for single note stuff. Now, in that line, I was intentionally playing stuff with a different dynamic. I was picking some notes harder than others, and you could kind of hear the amp break up a little bit more on the harder pick notes when the compressor was off. When it was on, everything sounded nice and even, and that's what its job is in this setting, just to even everything out. Now, there's one issue here that I really want to point out. Always on compression. A lot of people use it. A lot of people rely on it. I myself did for a long time. I had a compressor on my board with this kind of setting, and I would just leave it on all the time. When you have an amp set up like this, where you pick harder and it breaks up more, you need to have control over your dynamics to make your notes sound nice and even. With the compressor set up this way, it's doing that for you, and if you leave it on all the time, it can kind of become a crutch, meaning I can control how dirty or clean the amp is by how hard I'm picking when the compressor is off. When it's on in this setting, it doesn't let me do that. So if you're the type of player that has an always on compressor on your board, I would challenge you to turn it off. Turn it off and use your hands as your compressor. Use your hands as your dynamic control, and don't rely on the compressor to do that for you. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is set the compressor up to be more of an effect. We're going to hear the compression a lot more, and it's really great for like rhythm playing, funk playing kind of stuff, and the chicken picking kind of thing, where you really want to have a squashed, juicy kind of guitar sound. So what I've done is brought the sustain up really high and brought the attack back just a little bit, bring the volume back a little bit. And now I'm going to play like just a funk sort of rhythm part here on the Strat, and you should hear the difference. It's going to sound kind of pumping and thick. So there, the compressor's doing a lot of work. It's grabbing all of that super chunky rhythm stuff, and because the release time is set so slow, it's grabbing onto it and not letting it go, essentially compressing everything that I'm playing and helping you get that sort of super squashed, juicy, almost Nile Rodgers-esque kind of sound. Now, if you're into that Nile sound, there's actually a compressor for you that I would recommend you check out from Vertex. It's called the Nile compressor, and this is a compressor and preamp in a box, which is essentially trying to emulate the Nile Rodgers signal path when he was cutting all those, Chic records and all that stuff, which was a Strat, basically split into the recording console DI, going through an 1176 style compressor and then split out to another amp. But this box will give you that super DI, crunchy, squashed guitar sound, which is really cool. Now, the next thing we're going to do with this compressor is set it up as a boost going into the amp. And this is one of my favorite things to do with compressors. So I'm going to bring the sustain back down so that it's not acting so much, it's not compressing so much. I'm going to bring the attack back towards the middle a little bit, but I'm going to boost the volume. This is the makeup gain control, and I'm just going to hit it super hard going into the front of the orange here. So there you're getting the boost going into the front of the amp. So we're actually getting some natural amp overdrive because, again, this is not adding any saturation. It's not adding any clipping like an overdrive pedal would. It's just boosting the signal. So the overdrive we're getting is from the amp itself, which is cool, but we're also getting some compression on top of the natural amps compression that's happening. We're adding some more compression, which is giving us a little bit more sustain, and it's controlling the dynamic response of the notes, which is super cool. This is a great way to get some unique solo tones. So if I boost that volume even more, you can kind of hear how it's making the amp work super hard. What's cool about that is you're getting the amp's natural tone. This is basically as transparent of an overdrive sound as you sort of could get. You can get a similar thing with a boost pedal, but again, a boost pedal is not adding that compression. Now, one of my other favorite things to do is pair the compressor with an overdrive to get some more sustain out of the overdrive. So for this, what I'm going to do is send the compressed signal from the 3 series compressor into the Dane. I'm going to bring the release time or the sustain up, bring the attack time down, and I don't want to hit the front end of the Dane any harder, so I'm going to bring the volume down. So it's still just the natural sound of the overdrive pedal, but with some added sustain from the compressor. So here is the Dane on its own. So that's a pretty big difference, especially in terms of how it feels, how the notes and the amp is responding under my hands. There's a lot more sustain on tap. You can sit and hang on a note for longer when you've got the compressor going into the overdrive, which is a cool effect. Now, again, I want to drive home this point that this is not something that I turn on and leave on all the time. This is when I want a really specific sound. This is a really great way to get sort of that Dumble-esque kind of sound too. If you're trying to go for that really smooth, super compressed overdrive a la Robin Ford or Larry Carlton, the way the Dumble amp overdrives and breaks up, it has a really nice natural compression to it, and you can emulate that with a compressor going into a smooth clipping style overdrive. And I'm going to bring the gain down on the Dane here and get some sort of Dumble-esque kind of tones. That's a cool overdrive sound. So that's Compression 101. I hope this video helped you out. If you're new to compression or you've been using it for a long time but didn't fully understand it, like I said, this took me a long time to really start to grasp and understand. But once you understand a few of the fundamental concepts behind it, it makes all the sense in the world. And like I said, you can use this on everything. If you enjoyed today's video, let me know by leaving a like and a comment down below. You can also check out the tone course and my other video courses linked in the description box down below. Like I said, right now the tone course is 20% off via the discount code in the description box. So check that out if you're interested. Once again, thanks for watching. My name is Rhett Shull. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and remember, there is no plan B.